October 18th, 2002, Sacramento, California. That night, 27-year-old legal assistant Emily Carter returned to her Riverbend Court apartment. Hours later, the last trace of her was chilling. A balcony door left ajar, papers scattered across the floor, and a faint trail of blood leading into the dark. By morning, Emily was gone, without a sound, without a witness. Her family launched desperate searches. Candlelight vigils filled courthouse steps, and a city that prided itself on safety was shaken to its core. For years, the case sat frozen in the Sacramento cold case files. Then, nearly a decade later, a rusted knife pulled from a storm drain reignited everything. Could this weapon finally reveal what happened in apartment 214? Stay with us, because in this story, truth emerges slowly, but it changes everything. Subscribe now and join us as we uncover the secrets of Sacramento's most haunting cold case. October in Sacramento brought a different kind of chill, one that seeped in after sunset and drifted along the old brick walls and chain-link fences that lined Riverbend Court. The apartment complex stood just close enough to downtown to hear the distant sirens at night, but far enough to let the shadows pool undisturbed. On this particular Thursday evening, the faint orange glow of streetlights spilled over empty parking spaces and battered mailboxes, painting thin gold stripes across the cracked walkways. The city was alive, but the block where Emily Carter lived felt oddly suspended, as if holding its breath. Emily was a creature of habit, a 27-year-old who still preferred handwritten lists, clean desks, and well-creased trousers. That night, she arrived home later than usual, juggling a battered leather satchel and a tall stack of legal files that she refused to leave at the office. Her neighbors, those who noticed such things, watched her from behind curtains. The diligent young woman with straight brown hair, always in a hurry but never rude, her arms full of papers and ambition. She'd grown up just a few blocks away, an only child who returned from UC Davis with a law degree, a stubborn work ethic, and dreams as crisp as the autumn air. Sacramento was changing, rent rising, the skyline spiked with new condos. But for Emily, the city was still home. Her apartment, number 214, was small but neatly organized. Books lined the shelves, case law and mystery novels mixing side by side. The windows faced west, letting in a ribbon of dying sunlight as she dropped her keys on the counter and toed off her shoes. The only sound was the hum of her refrigerator and the distant clatter from someone's TV in a nearby unit. She flicked on the lamp by her desk and glanced at the clock. Nearly 9 p.m. Already, the weight of the day pressed on her shoulders. She poured herself a mug of herbal tea, set her files in tidy piles, and, for a moment, stood at the window, watching the headlights sweep past on the street below. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere down the hall, laughter echoed and faded. Emily's phone buzzed with a text, her mother reminding her about dinner that weekend. She smiled, typed a quick reply, and slipped the phone into her pocket. Unseen, unnoticed, life in Riverbend Court continued. The creak of old pipes, the scent of someone's midnight toast, the scuff of shoes in the stairwell. If anything unusual happened in those hours, it went unremarked. But as midnight neared, the light in Emily's window stayed on. Neighbors recalled later that she was up late, unusual for someone who always prized her rest before court mornings. Through thin apartment walls, someone heard the faint scrape of furniture. Someone else, half asleep, thought they heard a voice, raised, urgent, maybe angry, though the sound was quickly swallowed by silence. By 2 a.m., Riverbend Court was still. A stray cat prowled the bushes outside. The clock in the building's lobby ticked past 3. And in apartment 214, the soft glow of Emily's desk lamp burned on, casting a pale pool of light over scattered papers and a half-finished cup of tea. No one could say precisely when the line between normal and nightmare was crossed. In a city used to late-night noise and lost sleep, nothing seemed truly out of place. But by sunrise, everything had changed. When the sun rose over Sacramento that Friday morning, it found the city in the midst of routine. Commuters pouring coffee, kids hustling off to school, judges hurrying through security at the courthouse. Emily Carter was expected at work for a preliminary hearing. A small matter, but one she'd prepared for meticulously. She never missed a day without warning. By 9:15 a.m., her supervisor noticed her absence, first with annoyance, then with a growing sense of unease. Calls to her cell phone went straight to voicemail. Messages were left, unread. In the courthouse hallway, someone joked, "Emily finally slept in." But beneath the laughter, tension tightened. By noon, the worry had rippled outward. Her closest colleague, a junior attorney named Lisa, called Emily's parents. No answer. Calls went to the landlord. Something was wrong. The apartments on Riverbend Court, so ordinary, suddenly became a stage for worry and whispered speculation. When Emily's parents arrived just after 2 p.m., their faces were drawn and pale. They pleaded with the landlord to unlock the door. Sacramento police, summoned by the urgency in her mother's voice, arrived minutes later. The hallway outside apartment 214 was quiet, except for the click of radios and the low murmur of police voices. Inside, the apartment was a study in contradiction. The familiar scent of lavender soap lingered in the bathroom. Her shoes were neatly lined up by the door. But in the living room, something was wrong. Legal papers were scattered across the floor, as if someone had ransacked her files or searched for something in panic. A lamp lay tipped over, its bulb still, faintly warm. The sliding door to the balcony stood open, letting in a draft that fluttered a curtain and chilled the room. On the threshold, police found a faint, rusty smear, blood, later confirmed, trailing from the living room toward the hallway and vanishing at the door. The mug of tea was still warm. Emily was gone. No signs of a struggle strong enough to shatter furniture, but evidence of something deeply wrong. No forced entry, but unmistakable tension in every corner of the room. By sunset, her absence was a fact that could not be denied. The streetlights flickered on again as evening fell. Riverbend Court, so normal the night before, now held its breath, waiting for answers that would not come. And behind the locked door of apartment 214, the silence settled in. Thick, unbroken, and full of questions no one dared yet to ask. Sacramento in the early 2000s was a city in transition. Glass towers crept upward, crowding the horizon with cranes and the promise of prosperity. Coffee shops and night markets spilled into once quiet streets, and the hum of ambition mingled with the slow-moving Sacramento River that bisected the heart of downtown. Yet for every block polished by progress, there remained neighborhoods where secrets clung to the walls of aging apartment buildings. Places like Riverbend Court, just far enough from the capital's bright lights to be left alone by the city's gaze. It was in this restless landscape that Emily Carter had staked her future. Raised in a modest two-bedroom house off Broadway, she was the only child of Linda and Michael Carter, a pair of hard-working parents who poured every hope into their daughter's education. Emily was the kind of child who spent summer afternoons at the public library and weekends volunteering at food drives. Her teachers remembered her as quietly determined, quick to help but slow to trust. By high school, her ambition was unmistakable. She wanted to fight for what was right, to become the kind of prosecutor who could give a voice to people overlooked by the system. That drive carried her through 4 years at UC Davis, where she juggled part-time jobs, a mountain of textbooks, and a fierce belief in justice. By the fall of 2002, Emily had earned a coveted job as a legal assistant at the Sacramento County Courthouse. It wasn't glamorous. Her days were filled with filing motions, transcribing notes, and fetching endless cups of coffee for senior attorneys. But it was a start. She rented her own place at Riverbend Court, proud of the independence that came with her first real paycheck. Her apartment was modest, but filled with reminders of home. Photographs of her parents on the mantel, a faded teddy bear from childhood on her bed, and a stack of law books she refused to part with, even as new editions arrived each semester. Her friends described her as principled, reliable, and unwavering in her dedication. She was the one who remembered birthdays, brought soup to anyone, sick, and never missed a shift, even when the flu struck. There was a quiet gravity to Emily, an air of calm steadiness that put others at ease. Yet, beneath her careful routines, she held on to dreams much bigger than her current station. She wanted to prosecute dangerous offenders, to challenge injustice, to stand in front of a jury and demand truth. Yet, the Riverbend Court apartments were a far cry from the security of her parents' home. The building itself was a patchwork of worn carpet and flickering hallway lights, its tenants a shifting cast of young professionals, retirees, and drifters. Rent was affordable, but the atmosphere was less than comforting. On any given night, the sounds of Sacramento would drift in through thin walls. Arguments, laughter, the rumble of passing freight trains. Sometimes the elevator stuck between floors for minutes at a time. Sometimes a neighbor's dog barked late into the night. And sometimes, as Emily returned home after dark, she'd walk a little faster past the shadowed corners of the parking lot, her keys clenched between her fingers, just in case. Despite her caution, Emily tried to bring a sense of order to the chaos. She kept her door locked, her windows shut tight, and her routines predictable. She greeted her neighbors, old Mrs. Halverson with her overflowing plants on the second floor, Mr. Parks in 209 who always seemed to be fixing something in his kitchen, and even the surly man downstairs, whose name she'd never learned, but whose stare she always felt. Emily told herself she was safe, that she was careful, that her life in Sacramento was her own. But for all her careful planning, there were cracks she couldn't see. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Emily had seemed distracted. At work, she was quieter, sometimes lingering in her office long after her colleagues had left. She stayed late, working by the glow of her desk lamp, reviewing case files she wouldn't discuss. Friends noticed the circles under her eyes, the way she jumped at sudden noises. She brushed off their concern, blaming stress and a heavy workload. Sacramento was a city of masks, old neighborhoods hiding new money, smiling faces concealing secret resentments. Emily navigated it with a sense of purpose, but also a wariness she rarely let slip. Behind the locked doors and drawn curtains, every tenant nursed private hopes and private fears. No one truly knew what the person in the next apartment might be facing. It was a city where ambitions burned bright, but the darkness in the corners was easy to ignore. In this world, Emily Carter moved with determined optimism, clinging to her routines and her dreams. But in the days before she vanished, those closest to her sensed an undercurrent of anxiety, a gathering storm she refused to name. Her life was full of details, case files, grocery lists, calls home to her parents, and texts from old friends. Yet, for all her structure, something unspoken pressed in from the edges, growing heavier as the nights grew longer. As Sacramento pressed forward, transforming with each new construction project and political headline, the quiet struggles of people like Emily Carter went unnoticed, until, suddenly, the world stopped, and the city was forced to look into the shadows it had tried so hard to ignore. October 18, 2002, dawned gray and ordinary in Sacramento. But for the courthouse where Emily Carter worked, the day quickly soured into confusion. Morning routines at the Sacramento County Courthouse rarely faltered. Coffee brewed by 7, clerks bustling between offices, the sharp shuffle of legal documents echoing down the marble corridors. Yet as the hours slipped by, Emily's absence took on a weight all its own. She had never missed a shift, never failed to call in, never let her responsibilities slide. Each unanswered call and empty desk added a tremor of anxiety to the building's undercurrent. Her supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Harris, tried to brush it off at first, then found herself dialing Emily's cell again and again, each ring growing more insistent, every voicemail left more desperate. By mid-morning, the courthouse grapevine buzzed. Some whispered about a family emergency, others speculated about illness or exhaustion, but none of it matched the image of the precise, unwavering woman they all knew. By noon, Emily's parents, Linda and Michael Carter, received the news. Fear crept in, cold and relentless, twisting everything familiar into dread. The Carters drove across town in silence, their worry growing with every red light. When they arrived at Riverbend Court, Linda's hands shook as she pressed the intercom, her voice barely steady. The landlord, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, met them at the entrance. He hadn't seen Emily since the previous night. Her car was still parked in its usual spot, keys absent from the little key rack she'd hung by the door. Sacramento police responded with brisk professionalism. 2 officers arrived, their uniforms sharp against the faded paint of the apartment building. They took statements, asked questions, then followed protocol. With the landlord's permission and Linda's urgent insistence, they opened the door to apartment 214. Inside, the stillness was unnatural. The air held a faint chill, tinged with the scent of cooling tea and lavender soap. For a moment, nothing seemed amiss. Shoes lined up by the door, a favorite cardigan draped over the couch, a laptop blinking in sleep mode. But as the officers moved deeper into the living room, the calm unraveled. The floor was littered with scattered papers, case files and handwritten notes, marked with Emily's tidy script. A desk lamp lay on its side, bulb broken, as if it had been knocked over in haste. The balcony door hung ajar, letting a slice of cold air into the room. A single curtain flapped in the draft, its hem stained with something dark and rusty. Near the threshold to the hallway, an unmistakable sign. A faint, uneven trail of blood, leading away from the living room toward the door. It ended in a smudge, as if wiped away by a hurried hand. There was no sign of Emily. The officers moved quickly now, checking the small bedroom, the bathroom, closets, even the narrow balcony. All empty. Emily's purse sat untouched on the dining table. Her phone was nowhere to be found. The kitchen was neat, dishes rinsed and stacked. Only the chaos in the living room, the overturned lamp, the scattered files, and that thin, ominous trail hinted at the truth. Something violent had happened here. Linda's gasp shattered the silence. Michael gripped her hand so tightly his knuckles whitened, staring at the scene in disbelief. Police guided them back into the hallway, their voices low but urgent. Neighbors peeked from behind doors, concern etched on every face. The news spread fast, first as a rumor, then as a certainty. By afternoon, the Sacramento Police Department was fully engaged. Detectives arrived, gloves snapping, cameras flashing as they documented every detail. Evidence markers appeared across the living room, each one a silent question. What happened in the moments after Emily walked through that door? Why were her belongings left untouched, but she herself vanished? Why was there no forced entry, no smashed glass? Only a silent, simmering tension left behind. Outside, the world continued. Buses rumbled by. The sun broke through the clouds. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground. But inside Riverbend Court, the rhythm of normal life had stopped. Officers canvassed the building, knocking on doors, interviewing neighbors. Some remembered seeing Emily the night before, arms full of folders, smile tired but intact. One neighbor, a student pulling an all-nighter, thought she heard muffled voices, maybe an argument, but couldn't say when. Another, a retiree with a keen sense for gossip, insisted she saw a shadow moving past Emily's balcony near midnight, but the details blurred with the passing hours. That evening, yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, cordoning off the entrance to apartment 214. The building's tenants gathered in clusters, their voices low and anxious. Candlelight began to appear outside the door, first from Linda and Michael, then from friends and colleagues who arrived as word spread. Someone printed flyers, taping Emily's smiling face to lampposts and bulletin boards all over Sacramento. Her friends organized a vigil on the courthouse steps, holding candles against the darkness, their hope both fierce and fragile. Sacramento's local news quickly picked up the story. A young woman, a promising legal mind, vanished from her own home without a trace. Reporters crowded the sidewalk, microphones thrust forward as police carried out bags of evidence. The city buzzed with speculation and fear, the safe routines of daily life suddenly suspect. Behind every locked door in Riverbend Court, families wondered if they knew their neighbors as well as they believed. On that block, every shadow seemed to lengthen, every sound felt sharper. And behind the flickering glow of candles and the swirl of police lights, one question rang out again and again, echoing in every corner of Sacramento. What really happened behind the locked door of apartment 214? As the sun dipped below the jagged skyline of Sacramento, the truth of Emily Carter's disappearance bled into every corner of Riverbend Court. What had started as private panic now spilled out into the streets, gathering urgency with each new hour. The city's heart beat faster. Emily's parents, Linda and Michael, became a fixture on the block almost overnight. Their grief was raw and public, unspooling into action as soon as the initial shock ebbed into determination. Refusing to accept silence, Linda pored through her address book, dialing everyone she knew, her voice trembling as she begged for help. Michael stood in the parking lot, arms full of hastily made flyers, passing them to strangers and neighbors alike. Each sheet bore the same hopeful, haunted plea. Missing? Have you seen Emily Carter? The couple pressed the flyers into the hands of delivery drivers, pinned them to corkboards at grocery stores, tucked them under windshield wipers. Within 24 hours, Emily's face smiled out from every lamppost in a 10-mile radius, a frozen moment of optimism caught between two worlds. At night, the Carters barely slept. The apartment phone clutched between them like a lifeline, hoping each ring would be Emily's voice and not another well-meaning friend offering sympathy. They kept Emily's bedroom untouched, as if she might return at any moment, her keys jingling, her laugh echoing down the hall. Michael started lighting a candle on their porch every evening, letting the flame flicker into the darkness, a silent invitation for hope to return. But theirs was not the only light that grew against the darkness. Emily's friends, colleagues from the courthouse, old roommates from UC Davis, even casual acquaintances from her volunteer work, gathered in a growing circle. They organized candlelight vigils on the courthouse steps where Emily once ran between hearings, arms full of files. The flickering candles illuminated determined faces and red-rimmed eyes, a fragile barrier against the unknown. They held hands, recited prayers, and refused to let her name fade into the background noise of city life. Local news stations were quick to seize the story. By Saturday, the case was splashed across every channel, anchors recounting Emily's background. The driven young woman, beloved by friends and co-workers, with no history of reckless behavior or unexplained absences. Reporters set up camp outside Riverbend Court, their vans bristling with antennas, spotlights sweeping over the scene each night. The narrative was simple and chilling. A promising legal mind, vanished without a trace. No leads, no answers. The city's attention sharpened, suspicion threading through even the most mundane interactions. Within the complex, whispers turned into rumors. Neighbors who'd barely nodded in the hallway now gathered in tense, murmured circles. Some speculated about strangers lurking after dark. Others suspected someone closer to home. Mrs. Halverson from 211, who'd lived in Riverbend Court the longest, swore she saw a man pacing near the laundry room the night Emily disappeared. A face she couldn't quite place, a jacket she'd never seen before. In the absence of facts, stories multiplied, each one darker and more urgent than the last. The courthouse, once a backdrop to Emily's daily grind, became a place of mourning. Her empty desk grew into a shrine. Flowers, notes, a framed photo, a coffee mug left untouched. Judges and attorneys paused in their routines, some bowing their heads as they passed her workspace. Lisa, her closest friend at the office, led efforts to print more flyers, organize search parties, and support the Carters. She could not erase the memory of Emily's tired smile, the way her voice cracked with exhaustion in those final days. The whole legal community felt the loss, the gap where Emily's diligence and warmth had once fit. Yet, hope, no matter how slim, stubbornly persisted. The police tip line rang with calls, dozens at first, then hundreds. Most were dead ends, sightings that led nowhere, claims that dissolved under scrutiny. Still, detectives traced every rumor, canvassing neighborhoods, reviewing security footage from nearby businesses, searching for a pattern or clue. The lead investigator, a veteran named Morales, appeared nightly on the news, urging anyone with information to come forward. He did his best to calm the city's nerves, but his eyes betrayed the pressure mounting behind the scenes. And so, the days crawled by. Every morning, Linda and Michael returned to Riverbend Court, walking the perimeter, calling Emily's name softly as if she might materialize from the shadows. Every night, the candles burned, first on the Carters' porch, then on the courthouse steps, then outside Emily's empty apartment, the flames multiplying with each passing day. The vigil became a ritual, a show of unity against the darkness pressing in. But beneath the unity, fear festered. Whispers grew sharper. Had the police missed something? Was someone in the building hiding a secret? Could the perpetrator still be among them, moving through the halls with impunity? For the first time, residents locked their doors before dusk, watched strangers warily, and peered through their peepholes before venturing outside. As the city settled into uneasy vigilance, the case took on a life of its own. Emily Carter's face was everywhere, on screens, on polls, in the prayers of strangers. The flickering candles outside apartment 214 became a fragile symbol of hope. Yet, as days turned to weeks, hope itself became a double-edged sword, each new dawn bringing both the possibility of answers and the threat of an ending no one dared name. In the days and weeks that followed, Sacramento detectives set to work with a determined urgency, piecing together the last hours of Emily Carter's known life. The investigation, at first, unfolded with the precision of clockwork. Detectives walked the halls of Riverbend Court, notebooks in hand, recording timelines, tracing movements, searching for any anomaly that might unravel the mystery of apartment 214. Detective Morales, grizzled by years in missing persons and never one for false hope, built a timeline with painstaking care. According to building records and witness statements, Emily had arrived home at 9 p.m. Thursday night. A neighbor on the second floor reported hearing the heavy thud of footsteps around that time, followed by the faint squeak of the elevator door. Lights in her window glowed until well past midnight. Yet no one could say for certain what happened in those crucial, silent hours after. The detectives worked outward from the last confirmed sighting, interviews blurred together, voices overlapping. A young woman from 210 remembered Emily smiling and holding a stack of legal folders. A retiree swore she'd heard glass rattling in the night, though she'd dismissed it as a passing car. A student cramming for exams insisted she heard a raised voice through the walls, sharp, then muffled, cut short by a closing door. The fragments of testimony were like shards of a broken mirror, reflecting pieces of truth, but never the whole picture. It was in this tangled web that suspicion began to gather around two people. The first was someone familiar to almost everyone in Emily's orbit, her ex-boyfriend, Daniel Webb. Their relationship, once bright and hopeful, had withered in the final months under the weight of ambition and jealousy. Friends described their arguments as bitter, their last encounter public and heated outside a cafe on J Street. Daniel was a fixture at Riverbend Court, sometimes seen waiting in the parking lot or pacing the halls. The breakup was fresh, emotions raw. When questioned, Daniel admitted he'd called Emily several times that week, but insisted he hadn't seen her that night. He described himself as heartbroken, not violent. Still, the look in his eyes, a flicker of resentment, or perhaps just exhaustion, gave investigators pause. The second suspect lurked much closer to home. Downstairs from Emily lived a man named Victor Ramos, a shadowy figure with a reputation that made many tenants uneasy. Victor was known for late-night arguments, a revolving door of visitors, and a criminal record that included petty theft and trespassing. Several women in the building confided quietly to police that Victor had made them uncomfortable. Comments in the hallway, lingering stares, the occasional knock on their door late at night. In the days before Emily's disappearance, one neighbor recalled hearing Victor's voice rising through the vents, angry and slurred. He had been seen wandering the courtyard, muttering to himself, sometimes staring up at Emily's balcony. Detectives brought both men in for questioning. Daniel sat hunched at the table, eyes rimmed red, answering each question with a tired, defensive cadence. He provided alibis, cell phone records, credit card receipts, even a time-stamped coffee shop receipt from a late-night run. Nothing immediately contradicted his story, but Morales knew too well that timelines could be bent, that anger could simmer beneath the most ordinary surfaces. Victor, by contrast, was slippery. He denied knowing Emily beyond passing in the hall. His story shifted under pressure, at times evasive, at times oddly confident. He admitted to drinking alone the night of the disappearance, but claimed he went to bed early. When pressed about the disturbances neighbors heard, Victor shrugged and blamed the building's thin walls, the city's ceaseless noise. Detectives checked his apartment, unwashed dishes, stained carpets, but nothing tying him directly to the scene above. As the investigation pressed forward, evidence failed to materialize. No fingerprints out of place, no clear motive that pointed decisively in any direction. DNA collected from the faint blood trail near Emily's balcony was inconclusive. Too little, too smudged to make an immediate match. The case, so full of urgency and public scrutiny, began to slow. Morales and his team followed every lead, traced every phone call, examined hours of grainy surveillance footage from nearby convenience stores. They mapped every step Emily took in the days before her disappearance, searching for the thread that might connect victim and perpetrator. But as autumn deepened, the investigation stalled. Daniel and Victor were both released after hours of interrogation. No charges filed, no evidence strong enough to hold them. The courthouse, once the hub of hopeful search efforts, settled into an uneasy quiet. Emily's desk remained untouched, the flowers now wilting, the air heavy with absence. Whispers continued in Riverbend Court. Some residents avoided the elevator at night. Others double-checked their locks, nervous glances exchanged in the laundry room or parking lot. The sense of community, always tenuous, frayed further, replaced by suspicion and fear. In the police precinct, Morales stared at his board of timelines and photographs, frustration simmering. Emily Carter was still missing. 2 suspects, 2 lives forever changed by suspicion, but no answers. The streets outside blurred with rain, Sacramento's neon reflected in shallow puddles as hope and fear mingled in the city's heart. The case, once so urgent, now hovered dangerously close to cold. The truth as elusive as ever. By the spring of 2004, the Carter family's home had changed. It was not only the missing photographs from the living room wall, taken down in the hope that one day they'd be replaced by new, happier memories, but the way silence seeped into every part of their daily lives. The quiet, once gentle, now weighed like a blanket of dust, muffling even laughter. In Sacramento, the city's pulse marched on. New shops opened, buildings rose, politicians paraded promises across cable news. But for those who had loved Emily Carter, time seemed to move differently. For months after her disappearance, the police investigation churned along, propelled by hope and public attention. Detective Morales kept Emily's file at the top of his pile, reviewing case notes late into the night. He made weekly calls to the Carters, sometimes with small updates, more often with apologies. Yet as the leads thinned, even the most stubborn optimism began to fade. The flyers weathered in the rain, their corners curling, Emily's face becoming a ghostly imprint on faded paper. Linda Carter stopped attending the courthouse vigils after a while, unable to bear the sight of candles flickering out one by one as hope dimmed. Michael withdrew into work and chores, losing himself in routine, carrying the weight of each day as if penance for the daughter he could not save. The candles he lit every night on the porch became their own silent ritual, a promise never to forget, a beacon for anyone who might still have answers. The case was officially moved to cold status in the Sacramento PD files, a bureaucratic limbo that was both a mercy and a wound. The detectives no longer called with updates. The local news lost interest, their cameras turning instead to newer, more immediate tragedies. Riverbend Court gradually returned to its familiar patterns. Tenants moved out. New faces arrived, unaware of the shadows clinging to apartment 214. The landlord repainted the door and replaced the carpet, but could not erase the whispered warnings that echoed through the building's halls. There were days when hope surfaced unexpectedly. An envelope in the mail, a knock at the door, a rumor from a distant city. Each brought a surge of adrenaline, followed by another quiet disappointment. The world did not stop for the missing. Friends married, had children, sent holiday cards addressed only to Linda and Michael. Emily's old bedroom became a storage space, but her books, neatly stacked, gathered dust on the shelves. Her mother sometimes sat in the doorway at dusk, eyes closed, listening for a voice she'd never hear again. Meanwhile, Morales and the other detectives moved on to new cases, new crises. Yet he never truly let go. Once every few months, he would drive past Riverbend Court, slowing as he passed apartment 214, its balcony just visible through the overgrown trees. Sometimes he would imagine a flicker of movement at the window, or see a figure on the street below that reminded him of Emily. Hair tucked behind one ear, gaze focused, purposeful. But always, the moment slipped away. For the community, the loss of Emily Carter was not only a tragedy, but a warning. Riverbend Court never quite regained its sense of normalcy. Neighbors stopped leaving doors unlocked. Parents called their children in earlier at night, and tenants looked twice at every stranger in the hallway. The city itself, so eager to forget, could not quite scrub her absence from its conscience. Each autumn, on the anniversary of her disappearance, a few faithful friends would gather at the courthouse steps, lighting candles that guttered and burned against the cooling wind. Some years, only Linda and Michael attended. Other times, former colleagues or sympathetic strangers would join, standing in silence, holding hope for a justice that had not arrived. Sacramento's landscape shifted with the years. Cafes gave way to condos, new freeways cut across the river, and old shops closed their doors for the last time. Yet, at the edges of memory, Emily's story lingered. In the legal community, her absence was still felt, a void at meetings, an empty chair in courtrooms, a name spoken in whispers by new interns told to, "Be careful, watch out, remember Emily Carter." The flame on the Carters' porch burned smaller now, but it never went out. Neighbors learned to recognize its glow as the night deepened, a signal that some wounds, however old, had not healed. For Linda and Michael, each day without answers was a kind of quiet agony, a private ache carried into every conversation, every small joy dulled by the shadow of what was lost. Still, they refused to forget. For the Sacramento police, the file labeled Carter, Emily Cold Case remained on the shelf, its pages yellowing with time. Occasionally, a detective would pull it out, review the notes, and wonder at the stubborn mystery. No confession, no body, only questions. In a city growing brighter, one small flame stood stubbornly against the darkness, refusing to be snuffed out by time or forgetting. And so, the years passed, with memories of Emily Carter slowly dimming across Sacramento, but never fully erased, not from the city's heart, nor from the fragile hope that one day the truth would break through the silence. Autumn 2010. 8 years had passed since Emily Carter's disappearance. 8 long years in which hope faded and the city of Sacramento moved on, reshaping its skyline, its neighborhoods, its people. The world around Riverbend Court seemed almost unrecognizable to those who remembered that haunted October. New tenants had replaced old faces, and the memories of flickering vigil candles were buried beneath layers of more recent worries. But for Linda and Michael Carter, the pain never truly eased, and each passing year only deepened the sense that Emily's story might remain unresolved forever. Then, one wet November morning, a crew of construction workers arrived at Riverbend Court to repair a battered storm drain. The city had been lashed by rain all week, the kind of heavy downpour that clogged gutters, swelled the riverbanks, and carved ruts through even the most familiar streets. The workers grumbled as they sloshed through ankle-deep puddles, hauling tools and heavy machinery across the crumbling asphalt. While digging a trench near the base of Emily's old apartment building, one worker's shovel struck something unexpected, a dull metallic clang that echoed up through the drizzle. Curious, he knelt and brushed away layers of mud and gravel, uncovering a small, rusted kitchen knife, its blade still streaked with what looked like dried blood, the handle mottled with corrosion and age. The discovery, at first, was little more than a curiosity, lost trash from years before, perhaps, or the detritus of some long-forgotten quarrel. But something about the find unsettled the workers. They alerted the building manager, who in turn called the police. Within hours, yellow tape cordoned off the muddy patch of ground, and Detective Morales, older now, slower, but still haunted by unsolved cases, stood beneath a battered umbrella as forensics technicians carefully bagged the knife for testing. The city's hum quieted as word spread. Linda Carter received a call she had not expected to come, her hands trembling as the detective explained, in gentle tones, that something had been found. Michael listened, face drawn and tight, as Linda repeated the news. After years of silence, the smallest sliver of hope could cut as sharply as any blade. The forensics process, once glacial, had changed in 8 years. Technology had advanced. DNA analysis was faster, more precise. Within days, lab results confirmed what everyone feared. The dried blood belonged to Emily Carter. The knife had been the murder weapon, hidden just out of sight all those years, waiting for a winter storm to bring it back into the light. The discovery did what years of effort and mourning could not. It brought the case surging back to life. Sacramento's media seized on the story once again, resurrecting old headlines, replaying grainy footage of candlelit vigils, interviewing neighbors who could barely recall the frightened young woman from upstairs. The Riverbend Court complex, long accustomed to its faded reputation and whispering tenants, was thrust back into the city's glare. People who thought themselves safe revisited old anxieties, wondering if they had ever truly known what lingered behind those thin apartment walls. Detective Morales and his team pored over the evidence with a renewed intensity. The knife, once dismissed as lost to the elements, now carried the weight of long-buried secrets. Morales found himself revisiting every line of every report, every note scribbled in the margins by younger hands. New technologies were brought to bear: blood pattern analysis, trace element testing, modernized fingerprint scanning. For the first time in years, the investigation felt alive, driven not just by duty, but by the possibility, however, faint, of real answers. Linda and Michael Carter moved through this storm of renewed attention with a strange mix of hope and dread. The pain of Emily's loss had become a familiar ache, almost a scar, and the idea that justice might be possible now seemed at once miraculous and terrifying. Reporters camped on their lawn, asking for comments, probing for details, trying to resurrect every moment of the nightmare that had never really ended. The Carters endured it all with quiet resilience, determined to honor their daughter's memory, even if it meant opening wounds that had never truly healed. For Sacramento, The resurfacing of the knife was a reminder that the past could never be entirely buried, that the city's shadows stretched far deeper than the newest glass towers or freshly painted storefronts. Riverbend Court once again became a place of whispered rumors and anxious glances. Old tenants returned, driven by curiosity or guilt, each seeking reassurance that their memories were not at fault, that they had done everything they could. The police, spurred by public pressure and a renewed sense of obligation, doubled down on the case, determined not to let the opportunity slip away. Through it all, the knife sat in an evidence bag in the forensics lab, a silent witness to secrets too long ignored. For years, it had waited in the cold earth, its truth muffled by mud and rain and time, until finally the city was forced to look once more at the darkness behind Riverbend Court's locked doors. And as the city buzzed with speculation and hope, Morales and his team chased the one thing that had always eluded them: the truth about what really happened to Emily Carter on that stormy October night, and who, after all these years, was still out there, hiding in plain sight. With the murder weapon found, Sacramento's cold case detectives were jolted awake as if the years of waiting had only been a prelude. Detective Morales, his hair now streaked with gray, pressed into the new investigation with a tenacity that belied his age. The city that had once let Emily Carter's name fade from the headlines now buzzed with anticipation and unease. News vans returned to Riverbend Court. Neighbors eyed each other in elevators and laundry rooms, wondering what secrets lay dormant beside them. Forensic results on the knife came back in less than a week. The blood belonged to Emily. No one doubted that. But a breakthrough came in the form of a partial DNA profile recovered from the knife's handle. It was enough to run through California's database, and in the sterile hush of a state crime lab, a match appeared on the screen. The sample pointed not to Emily's ex-boyfriend, Daniel Webb, nor to any stranger, but directly to Victor Ramos, the troubled downstairs neighbor who had haunted Riverbend Court's rumors for years. The news landed with the force of a thunderclap. The police released a statement. Victor Ramos, deceased since 2006, had been the primary suspect all along. He had died in a car accident 4 years after Emily's disappearance. A grimly ordinary end for a man whose life had shadowed so many in his final years. For Morales and his team, the DNA match provided a narrative the city had craved. The police closed ranks around the story. The case, after years of agony, was finally solved. For some, this was enough. Relief flooded through Riverbend Court. Tenants who remembered Victor whispered about his strange habits, how he'd once been arrested for theft, how he'd unnerved the women in the building. Now, with the narrative completed by science, people allowed themselves to relax. Linda and Michael Carter, hollowed out by years of uncertainty, accepted the news in silence. There was closure, of a kind. But beneath the surface, doubt refused to disappear. Morales found himself sitting alone in his office after the press conference, flipping through pages of old witness statements. His mind wandered back to the night of Emily's disappearance. More than one neighbor had reported hearing not just the shouts of a man, but overlapping voices. Footsteps, hurried and desperate, echoed in the hallway. A crash of glass, a scream quickly muffled, and then nothing. Some neighbors said they saw Victor in the stairwell that night, but others swore they saw shadows moving on the balcony, silhouettes in the glow of the streetlights. One student claimed to have heard a woman crying for help. 2 voices, not one. The evidence pointed to Victor, but it didn't account for every piece of the puzzle. Why had no one seen Victor leave the building? If he had acted alone, How had he managed to move Emily, cover his tracks, and leave behind so little evidence? The knife, after all, had not been disposed of far from the scene, but instead buried just beneath the surface, not even 50 yards from where Emily lived and vanished. As Morales stared at the photo of Victor, faded and blurry, he wondered if the case had closed too neatly. There were other details that wouldn't let go. A missing phone that had never been found, strange footprints on the balcony that didn't match Victor's shoe size, a partial fingerprint recovered from the sliding door, never matched to anyone in the building or in the state's system. The more Morales thought about it, the more the official ending felt like a bandage over a wound still festering beneath. For the community, peace was fleeting. The local newspaper ran a headline, "Cold case solved after 8 years," and then moved on to the next tragedy. At Riverbend Court, tenants eventually stopped talking about Emily Carter, though sometimes, late at night, the old anxieties crept back. Some wondered if Victor had been a scapegoat, the easy answer to an impossible question. Others believed justice, however imperfect, was better than nothing. The Carters faced their own struggle. Closure was what they'd asked for, but now that it had come, it felt incomplete. Linda found herself lying awake, replaying every moment of Emily's last weeks, her daughter's distracted expression, her nervous laughter, the unexplained silences. Michael, who had once patrolled Riverbend Court each morning searching for signs, now wandered the block out of habit, unsure if he was looking for truth or just reliving pain. As autumn slipped into winter, the city's energy shifted again. Morales, though officially done with the case, kept a box of Emily's files beneath his desk. On stormy nights, he'd take them out, convinced that somewhere in the mess of interviews, timelines, and forensic reports was the answer everyone had missed. He wondered if another shadow still lingered in the city, someone who, for 8 years, had watched the search unfold and never come forward. For now, the case was officially closed. But behind every locked door, behind every flicker of candlelight, and in the hearts of those who remembered, the question still echoed. If Victor Ramos hadn't acted alone, who else was there on that terrible night in 2002? In Sacramento, hope and anguish collided, leaving a community unsettled, searching for peace that might never come. The official closure of the Emily Carter case rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. For a few weeks, the name Riverbend Court once again caught the attention of Sacramento's residents. Newspapers recounted the strange, tragic details. News segments replayed candlelight vigils, slow pans of old police tape, and weathered photographs of Emily's smiling face. On the surface, the city had found its ending. But for many, the sense of unease lingered. The story would not let go. Beneath the headline, beneath the police reports and the evening news, Emily Carter's disappearance echoed an even older tragedy, a story that haunted Sacramento for generations. More than 30 years before Emily vanished, another young woman, Nancy Benelak, a court reporter at the Sacramento County Courthouse, was found murdered in her own apartment. In 1970, Nancy's death shook the city to its core. She was a devoted professional, well-liked, diligent, and, like Emily, full of hope for her future. Nancy's case remained unsolved for decades. Her family endured years of questions, candlelight vigils, and false leads. Neighbors whispered theories, old detectives revisited evidence, and the courthouse mourned the loss of a promising life. In many ways, Nancy's story shaped the way Sacramento understood loss and resilience, the haunting knowledge that even in a city full of eyes and ears, the most tragic secrets could remain hidden for lifetimes. Emily's case, fictional though it may have been, was woven from the fabric of that very real loss. The details of her life, the only child of loving parents, the aspirations to bring justice to others, the ordinary routines that became evidence, the community's stunned grief, were reflections of Nancy's memory. In both stories, the victim was a bright, determined woman cut down before her prime, her absence creating a void that no measure of justice could ever fully heal. The biggest twist in Nancy's case would not come for over 50 years. As forensic science leaped forward, new DNA techniques, specifically forensic genealogy, allowed investigators to identify her killer at last. The truth emerged slowly, painstakingly, as scientists matched old genetic material to distant relatives in family ancestry databases. Piece by piece, the puzzle fell into place. The man responsible had died years before. There would be no trial, no confession, no moment in court where the truth was spoken aloud. When the announcement came, Sacramento experienced a bittersweet catharsis. The name Nancy Benelak returned to public memory, not as an unsolved mystery, but as a life finally given its due recognition, a story no longer adrift in uncertainty. Her loved ones gathered for a small, quiet ceremony, planting flowers at her grave, speaking of her kindness, her laughter, her belief in justice. Reporters framed the moment as the triumph of science over silence, a lesson in the persistence of truth. But even with the case closed, there were questions no one could answer. The decades of pain and waiting could not be erased. For the investigators, the closure was a victory, but it was also a reminder of the cold cases that still lingered, their files yellowing on forgotten shelves. For the families, there was healing, but also a new kind of sorrow, a final goodbye, stripped of hope, but edged with the dignity of knowing the truth. For the community, the lessons cut deep. Justice delayed was still justice, but it came at a price. The city's wounds, old and new, could only be healed by facing them directly, by remembering the lost not as headlines, but as human beings with stories worth telling. Sacramento became a city that knew the value of memory, of persistence, of never letting go, no matter how long the wait, no matter how cold the trail. Emily Carter's story, though born of fiction, was an echo of Nancy's legacy. It was a tribute to the victims whose voices faded too soon, to the families who refused to forget, and to the detectives who worked through the slow grind of hope and disappointment. The story carried a quiet message, that in the fight for truth, even the smallest act, a lit candle, a shared memory, a single determined question, could matter. Even as the city grew and changed, these stories endured, waiting for the moment when the darkness would finally lift and the truth would stand in the light. For those who listened, who remembered, who searched and refused to let go, the message was clear. Every name mattered. Every unanswered question was a challenge, and every victory for truth, no matter how long delayed, was a light against the shadow of forgetting. In the days after the official closing of Emily Carter's case, the city of Sacramento seemed to draw a collective breath, as if exhaling years of uncertainty in a single moment. The news cycle moved on. The vigil candles that once lined the courthouse steps guttered out, their wax running down in silent rivers. Flyers curled on telephone poles, their edges faded by sun and rain, Emily's smile dissolving into the background of a city eager to forget its darkness. But for those whose lives she had touched, Emily's absence was not something to be washed away with the changing seasons. Linda and Michael Carter, after nearly a decade of heartache, found themselves at a crossroads familiar to so many families of the lost. How to mourn a daughter whose memory was still so present, whose voice still echoed in the quietest corners of their home. The rituals they'd built, the porch candle, the birthday flowers left by her photograph, the silent toasts at family dinners, took on a new meaning. Closure, they discovered, was not a finish line, but a door that led into a new landscape of remembrance. They turned their grief into quiet acts of honor. Linda organized a scholarship in Emily's name at UC Davis, hoping that some determined young woman, driven by justice and hope, might pick up the torch her daughter had carried. Michael visited the courthouse each year on the anniversary, pausing at the steps where hundreds had gathered to demand answers, to offer prayers, to bear witness to a life stolen too soon. For the Carters, every act of remembrance was an act of defiance, a refusal to let Emily become just another cold statistic. Others, too, felt the story's lasting weight. Detective Morales, who had watched the case grow cold and then flare to life with one rain-soaked discovery, carried its lessons into every new investigation. He taught younger officers that every missing person mattered, that every silent detail could one day change everything. He kept a photograph of Emily in his desk drawer, a private reminder of the promise he'd made to the Carters, that no one would stop searching for truth, no matter how long it took. In Sacramento's legal community, Emily's memory became a quiet guide. Judges recalled her diligence. Young attorneys, hearing the story during orientation, found themselves inspired to be thorough, to speak for those who could not, to understand that justice was rarely swift but always worth the fight. For them, the case was not just a warning, it was a call to action. The city itself, changed by decades of loss and growth, could never quite forget the lessons buried beneath Riverbend Court's weathered walls. People became more vigilant. Neighbors looked out for each other in ways they never had before. Parents taught their children to trust their instincts, to speak up when something felt wrong, to never let fear or indifference drown out the need for action. In coffee shops and on park benches, older residents sometimes told newcomers about the candles, the search, parties, the hope that had survived so many disappointments. The story passed from mouth to mouth, a living memory that shaped the city's conscience. The lesson, in the end, was simple but profound. Justice mattered, even when it was delayed, even when it arrived without the finality of a courtroom trial. Truth, though sometimes obscured by time and circumstance, could still heal wounds left open for years. And remembrance, the stubborn act of keeping a lost loved one's story alive, was itself a form of justice. On what would have been Emily's 35th birthday, Linda and Michael stood by the river that wound through Sacramento, their hands clasped tightly. They released a small lantern onto the water, watching it bob in the current, its tiny flame a pinpoint of hope against the coming night. All around them, the city moved in the familiar rhythms of daily life, but for a moment, it seemed as if everything paused. The rush of cars, the chatter of distant voices, the relentless passage of time. In that silence, Emily's memory shone brighter than ever. Elsewhere, Detective Morales filed away the last of the case notes. He wrote a letter to Nancy Benelak's family, the victim whose real-life tragedy had inspired so much change in Sacramento's cold case division. He thanked them for their courage, for their refusal to let the world forget. The past, he knew, could never truly be buried. But it could be honored, and its lessons could light the way for those still searching. As the city's lights blinked on, one by one, across neighborhoods old and new, The legacy of Emily Carter endured, not in headlines or in sorrow, but in the simple, stubborn act of remembering. Sacramento became a city that did not turn away from its wounds, but learned to carry them forward, using them to build a future where every voice, every loss, and every search for justice mattered. Some wounds, it turned out, could only be healed by truth. Some stories, once unearthed, would never slip quietly into the dark again, and some lights, though battered by time and grief, would never go out. If you've stayed with this story, honor Emily and the real lives behind every cold case. By remembering, by caring, and by seeking justice. Subscribe, share, and help keep these memories alive. For some stories are not over until the truth is finally told.